Good morning, Minister and friends and colleagues. I was saying to a few people out in the corridor, there's something quite emotional about this, seeing so many familiar faces in person all together after so long. And it's such a great occasion and so timely, as the Minister has said, that we're here to mark the publication and finalisation of a vision for youth work. And I'm really, really grateful to Mary and NYCI for having had the opportunity to be involved in bringing the vision and the document to completion. And it's clear from what people have said already that it's not just a vision for NYCI or for voluntary organisations or the youth work sector, as it's very often called. It's a vision for youth work, and that includes everybody involved in it, including the ones I've just mentioned, but also a vision for what the state might be doing and where the state might appropriately intervene and how the state and the voluntary sector might work together. And it's 20 years since there was a similar statement of a vision for youth work. That was in the National Youth Work Development Plan, published almost precisely 20 years ago. Before that, it was 10 years since NYCI had published a comprehensive, towards a comprehensive youth service, which also had a visionary dimension, so to speak. And before that, it was 10 years, so 40 years from since 40 years ago that the Costello report was published, the National Youth Policy Committee's final report. So these types of things don't happen very often, and it's important to mark them appropriately when they do. I'm not going to go through the process or the timeline. Both Dennis and Mary have given you some indication of what it involved, but when you see commenced March 2020, you immediately are given cause to remember the circumstances in which the process was launched. And anything that started in March 2020 took a hell of a lot longer than might have been expected at the time. So this has been an extraordinarily extensive, intensive, and comprehensive process involving research, consultation, engagement of multiple kinds. I'm not going to, as I say, go into the detail of it. It's important, however, to stress where I came into it. I arrived into the process, I was invited, when the overall vision had been agreed and adopted. And all of it had been really completed except for the focus groups with young people. There were key informant interviews with 13 people representing a very wide range of perspectives in the sector, and then the focus groups with the young people themselves also captured the voices of very diverse groups of young people in terms of geographical location, types of project and organisation, identity, including gender, sexuality, ethnicity. And so this represents an extraordinarily rich source on which to draw, set of sources on which to draw in capturing and communicating a vision. Marie-Claire McAleer and James Durley had done the original work when I arrived, except for the focus groups, as I say, which Marie-Claire then proceeded with before she left NYCI, as James had some time before. But I felt that in order to do what I had to do properly, I needed to consult more than their notes, and believe me, their notes were extraordinarily comprehensive and useful. But I felt that I needed to get closer to the source, and those of you who are involved in qualitative research will know how important that is. So what I was presented with was a set of very substantial extracts from the interviews. But these were anonymized, obviously, because the people, I wasn't involved in the interview myself and don't know who the people were who were interviewed. but they were anonymized not just in the sense that names were removed, but that they were redacted, or more accurately, there were deletions or excisions to remove any identifying information. And this was a vast panoply of expertise and of rich insight, actually thoroughly engrossing and a great pleasure to read. I felt privileged to be able to have access to it. But I'm telling you all that just to make it clear that while I have a background in youth work in multiple ways, as a participant, as a leader, as a paid worker, as an educator, as somebody involved over the years in policy in many ways as well myself, and I've worked with so many of you in one or other of those ways, and I was invited by NYCI because of that background and the understanding it gives me of the vocabulary and the ethos of youth work. But I was also engaged, I think, because of my background in social research, so as a researcher and an analyst, and that's what I brought, I think. That was my intention, at least. And there were a few occasions when I was able to draw on my experience and indeed my great old age, compared to many of you, to be able to suggest the insertion of something specific. So a lot of people among the interviewees, in particular, mentioned the Costello report, the National Youth Policy Committee's report, going back 40 years. And a lot of the interviewees mentioned youth work's role in relation to positive social change, which the Costello report made a very bold statement about, perhaps the strongest, certainly the earliest strong statement about youth work and positive social change. What I was able to do was, because I worked as researcher for the Costello report, was find a few lines from the Costello report that captured that. That's the type of thing that I inserted. Whenever people spoke about non-formal education and learning, informal education and learning, and both of those were stressed by the interviewees and indeed in different ways by the young people, I suggested a short definition of each of them to be inserted in the text. But that's what what you might call original input amounted to. Otherwise, the content is yours. The content was generated by the people who were involved in this extraordinarily, as I say, comprehensive process of research and engagement. It genuinely does represent what you said. And so the format then, you'll get the opportunity to explore it in more detail in the workshops. The format is pretty standard. There's a double-page spread. Initially, there's a statement of the overall vision. We'll come to it in a moment. Dennis has read it out to you. Then there's a double-page spread for each of the aspects. It's fairly standard. It's also quite wordy, you might say. Some have said. It's textually quite dense. But to be honest, I felt that that was essential to do justice to the sheer scale and richness of the insights that were contained in all of the materials that were made available to me. So in capturing and communicating adequately what youth work is, I think quite a lot of words were required, even though it's a compact document. And I really think it's vital that we don't take for granted, among those of us who do know a lot about youth work, that we don't take things for granted when we're trying to communicate with other people. And this vision statement needs to speak to a wide range of people. So it needs to set things out very, very explicitly, and sometimes at what might seem like quite a degree of length. If things aren't explicitly stated and recorded in documents like this, which, as I said earlier, don't come along very often, if they're not recorded, then they have no hope of being remembered. Sadly, I also know that even when things are recorded, sometimes they're not remembered. It's so heartening to hear the minister speak authoritatively, clearly from a position of being informed and also from a position of being enthusiastic, to speak about what youth work is. That is genuinely heartening. But the documentation doesn't give us cause for heart. The Costello report didn't just deal with youth work. It dealt with young homeless people, young people with disability, care, young people in care, employment, unemployment and training, educational welfare, what was then called young offenders. So youth work was only a relatively small part of this very wide remit. But the Costello Committee, it's hard to do a search because it's not online fully in the way that other documents are, but it mentions youth work between 150 and 200 times. Better Outcomes, Brighter Futures, with a similar range of themes, and admittedly including children as well as young people, but it mentioned youth work 18 times. And it mentioned youth workers twice. Young Ireland mentions youth work twice. And it doesn't mention youth workers at all. Now, I'm not saying that's a deliberate or even a conscious attempt to diminish or demean youth work. Far from it. I really don't think that. But it's telling. Documentary analysis can sometimes give you insights into wider processes or ways of thinking. And it's telling, and it may be worrying. So it's really important that youth workers and youth work organisations and the young people involved set out and even shout out what youth work is and keep doing so. And what the Minister said about youth work gives great cause for optimism that the action plan that is forthcoming will be more affirming in that regard, although I note that the title is still takes various forms, even as we've heard already this morning. So to come to the overall vision, and I'm not going to go through it in detail, it's not necessary, you have it in writing and you're going to be discussing it. It's really important, though, to stress that we need to attend both to the totality of it and the parts and the relationship between the parts. And I think the key word is the first word, all. Every young person in Ireland should be able to look out from wherever they are and not have to look too far and find youth work available to them and not have to wonder what it is, hopefully, ideally, never have heard of it, certainly not have to go to great lengths to find it. They should see people like themselves in it, working in it, operating in it, inviting them into it, but they should also be able to see people not like themselves. They should have the opportunity both to find support and affirmation for who they are, and also the opportunity to encounter and get to know people who are not like them at all. Both of these things. And if they don't want or they genuinely don't need youth work, of course, that's fair enough if that's their view. But it must be their choice, and that's certainly not the situation at the moment. Then, just skipping on a few lines, there's this reference to meeting expressed needs. Now, that implies the facilitation of a process, because not everybody, whatever our age, not everybody is equally comfortable or capable of expressing our needs. So that's where other parts come in, the skilled professionals, the well-supported volunteers, and the skills and knowledge that they bring as well. People who know what they're doing on a wide range of fronts. And that, in turn, also requires resources, which is touched on here, and ways of assuring and promoting and sustaining quality. And at the heart of it all is this term, youth work. That includes so much, there is so much to be unpacked in the term youth work that we take for granted, but people who don't know about youth work don't know about at all in many cases. And so that's what the aspects try to do. Dennis has given a great flavour, both of the spirit and of some of the specifics of these. So I leave it to you to go into them more in the workshops. But what I want to stress is the kind of the logical coherence of it, or that's the intention in distilling the 17 themes down to this shorter list of 8. these aspects might be seen as answering a set of questions. What is youth work in the case of number 1? And that obviously includes the legislative definition, but it goes beyond that. It also includes the enduring principles and values of youth work. And then, maybe somewhat paradoxically, as well as what endures, the flexibility, which is itself a principle of youth work, to be able to respond to increasingly changing times. What is it, firstly? Then secondly, who's it for? And we know the answer to that. It's for all young people, at least potentially. Thirdly, what difference does it make? That's what 3 and 4 attempt to address, the impact that youth work has individually for young people, for groups of young people, for categories of young people, and for society. And it does that through this connection and action at a wide range of levels, from local to global. Again, thank you, Dennis, for having illustrated that. Then, who does it? This is where the people, capacity, support, and diversity comes in. Again, all is potentially the answer, not in the sense that everybody is or should be a youth worker, but all groups within society, the full diversity of society should be reflected in youth work, in the workforce and in the population of young people involved in it. How do we know it works and keeps working? That's where the quality comes in, and the relevance and the responsiveness. And then finally, what needs to be in place in order for it to happen and to flourish? And that's where 7 and 8 comes in, the resources and the recognition and the structures and systems. And it's very important to note, you'll see this if you go through the document, that young people feature consistently throughout all of these. These aren't just statements about some abstract entity called youth work or about youth workers, although they include both of these, of course. Young people are right at the heart of each aspect and all of the context and considerations that underpin and provide a rationale for the aspects. You'll see right underneath the overall vision a statement that the vision integrates and is underpinned by a set of themes, or what we're calling here aspects. So it integrates and is underpinned by, and that is the final point, or a few interrelated points that I want to make. It must be seen from that point of view. It only makes sense, actually, in its totality. Now, it may be the case that elements of it might overlap with, or correspond to, or be similar to aspects that you'll find in other forms of provision or practice or service. Inevitably, that will be the case. But when all of these come together, when you can find all of them at the same time, then we're talking about youth work, and we're not talking about anything else. And this means, therefore, that there are both conceptual and practical links, both within the overall vision, between the vision and the aspects, and between the aspects themselves, between any pair of them and between all of them as a totality. And if I were still a full-time teacher in Maynooth University, which I stopped being a little while ago, thankfully still involved with colleagues and some students, but if I were, I might be inclined to set an assessment task, inviting the students to imaginatively or creatively illustrate the links between the different aspects. For a somewhat different purpose, Hilary and I actually use an assessment exercise just like that. I know I'm sending a chill down the spine of an awful lot of people in this room at the moment. Don't worry, I won't be asking you. But it could be done, and that's the point. And so I'll just in concluding, I'll just mention a couple of examples between aspect 1, nature and purpose, and aspect 8, structure and systems. In both of them, the principle of partnership, or principles of partnership and participation, including of young people, are absolutely central. And each of them only makes sense when that relationship is taken into account. Between the nature and purpose and the impact, personal and social, there's an absolutely integral link. For example, the voluntary participation of young people is central to the legislative definition of youth work in Ireland, as in most, certainly many other places. But the impact of youth work includes the voluntary engagement, the voluntary association of young people with each other and with adults. That's part of its impact. So the difference it makes is the very fact of what it is. And that sometimes isn't adequately acknowledged in demands for monitoring and evaluation of youth work. Its very existence makes a difference. Access and opportunity that we've spoken about already. If every young person is to be able to look at youth work and see themselves represented within it and see it as inviting to them, then there are clear workforce challenges. And so the people aspect comes into play. Thank you very much.